Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington with the Spirit of EQ, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. Today's episode is around generational EQ.
Life is a journey. Spirit of EQ helps shape and guide the road ahead for individuals, leaders, teams, and organizations striving to realize their full potential through emotional intelligence. Spirit of EQ is a coaching and consulting company that assists individuals and businesses to reach their full potential by developing emotional intelligence. In business, managers and leaders recognize the value of training to develop leadership skills. What they may not realize is that those skills are far more effective when they pay attention to not only performance, but also to people. Emotional intelligence is a crucial skill because people drive performance and emotions drive people. After this podcast, listen for a special opportunity to learn more.
And joining me, as always, is Jeff East with the Spirit of EQ. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hi, Eric. Hello, everyone.
And joining us today, we have a special guest, Mr. Andrew Hulse of Futurety. And he is on the line with us. We're going to have a great conversation today around some generational ideas and emotional intelligence. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good afternoon to you, Eric and Jeff, and it's a pleasure to be here talking with you guys. I'm excited.
I want to start off today because when I put this together, I'm sure that Jeff and our producer, Brett, were kind of like, generational EQ, where's he going with this? Well, I'm going to harken back to a conversation we had some time ago about the different ways that each generation looks at emotional intelligence and how they use that per se in their decision making. And I think it was that conversation we had about that real high level of confidence that sometimes baby boomers and Gen Xers have around the corporation. You remember that?
Yes, I do remember it very well.
Today, I'm hoping you can give some insights about what's going on inside of your generation, your community, what you're seeing and hearing, and how that may translate to others who are in different parts of the United States and beyond. The thing that I want to start with here with you, maybe the first question, Andrew, is we have a competency model inside of our EQ model, which is called exercising optimism. Exercising optimism is maybe pretty straightforward, and I do believe, Jeff, we even hit on that on one of our episodes at one time.
One of the early ones.
Yeah. So with that, where do you see the millennial generation as it relates to optimism? How optimistic are you and maybe those that you know who are in your generation? And I kind of gave it away. You're in the millennial generation. So so from that perspective, what's the optimism looking like from that perspective?
Well, hopefully I can shed some good light on the millennial generation. I know that's been the past couple of years. It was probably right when I was getting into college when the conversation around millennials was starting to heat up, with the acceleration of technology and the fact that we were using it every day all the time. But I think that it's not necessarily as black and white as some of the other generations might like to see, I guess, the general term optimism. So I think myself personally, I'm a really optimistic person. I'm very extroverted. I'm happy about everything most of the time. I often tend to see things as very much glass half full. But I think that optimism for millennials isn't necessarily just, yes, we're optimistic about work. Yes, we're optimistic about life. I think we're optimistic about different parts. I think we compartmentalize the work and life into many different aspects. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about life, where the world is going, I would say millennials, in general, we care a lot about the impact that we're having on the world that we live in, on the environment, on our the political landscape that we're in right now. So I think that we're optimistic in the things that we have the ability to do. And what I mean by that is the power that we have to change the direction that we are heading right now. So I think that we might not necessarily be optimistic about the environment. We might not be optimistic about where necessarily our politics are heading, but I think we're optimistic that we feel that we do have the ability to change those things. And oftentimes I think it gets seen in a negative light, but we're just not afraid to speak out. And we have so many platforms to do so. It's never been before that I'm sure many different generations. I mean, could you imagine back in the 60s and 70s when the hippie movement and everything started coming about, if they would have had Twitter or Instagram or Facebook at that time? They had to march, or they had to go to events. They had to do things in person, whereas the millennials, we have the power in our thumbs to talk about it and to band together on a larger scale. So I think that it gets seen in a negative light, but it necessarily might not be.
That's a great point, Andrew.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Getting into the work part, though, this kind of stems back to what you mentioned earlier about the whole idea of corporate America and the way that the boomers and the generation, my parents' generation came up. I don't think many people are necessarily optimistic about corporate America. I think that we really, really, to A, be a consumer and purchase from a brand consistently, and B, to want to work for them, we want to know that what they're doing is making an impact and a positive impact. Because I know for myself personally, and many people that I talk to that are in my generation, my friend group, we're not okay with just contributing to some false idea that what we're doing is making an impact. We have to be able to see the fruits of our labor. And that might be something that, you might not be able to see that in a place like Uber. You don't know if your marketing campaign that you worked on, you might see an impact, but it's not going to be adding huge revenue dollars to the company. But as long as we're seeing that the work that we're doing is leading to a larger organizational impact, I think that is where we are very optimistic. And that's where a lot of organizations are winning when it comes to recruiting. So if you look at LinkedIn, you look at Airbnb that recently just posted, hey, if you just got laid off in the giant marketing department layoffs at Uber, come work for us and help change the world of hospitality. So I think that's where our optimism is shifting. And that's why you're seeing so many people in my generation jump around. And it's funny because my parents and my grandparents, I love them, but man, when I first started my career, they were tied in knots about how I was approaching the stuff I was doing, the risks I was taking, and, not necessarily sticking out a job if I felt like it just was a terrible fit. So that's really, I think the landscape is shifting, and it's making the talented young professionals that are coming out of school, coming out of grad school, have a lot more power in the say in what they're doing than maybe corporations would like.
It's interesting. Jeff and I have talked about this many times on the show about, when you encounter circumstances that are not necessarily what you want them to be, EQ has a way of helping you kind of manage how you look at them and how you manage them. And you said something there that really kind of triggered it a bit for me, is that how do we maneuver when things are not looking the way that we want them to? And obviously there's some things that are out of your control, and then there's some things that are. And I think based on a lot of what you were saying there, you can use optimism to fuel you even in the stuff that doesn't necessarily make you feel so good. Would you agree with that, Andrew?
Yeah, I would. Absolutely.
So in work and life, obviously it's a mixed bag, right? From the millennial generational point of view. And Andrew, you know this about me in our previous conversations. I do believe the millennial generation does get dumped on a little more than most others, with all kinds of stereotypes and the like, which is probably what the baby boomers did to the Gen Xers, and probably the greatest generation did to the baby boomers, and on and on and on it goes, right? So one of the things that I wanted to kind of open up a little bit, if you had to give some advice to someone around a struggle with negativity, because oftentimes if you're not optimistic, there's a good chance you might be pessimistic, right, or negative. So when you encounter the negativity, what are some of the things you typically, maybe try to point out for folks if they're really trying to kind of get out of that rut?
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, because I recently actually posted something on LinkedIn around this topic of negativity, at least professionally. But I think both professionally and in your personal life, if you're truly trying to get away from a negative mindset, you have to make genuine, hard decisions about, and you have to commit to it. Because if you're in a negative space, there's a good chance that your environment is playing a huge part to that. So when you hear people being negative, they're complaining about a situation or all of their situations and the things that they experience in a day-to-day, they're seeing it with that negative lens in a pessimistic way. And I think that your environment plays such a huge part in that. And that would be my first thing, is evaluate your surroundings, evaluate your personal life. Are you interacting with good people who are working towards a better goal, are supporting you and your goals and what you're trying to achieve? Are you consuming content that is negative? Because if you're on Twitter all day and you get down a political thread where people are just arguing back and forth, it is impossible not to get sucked into that. So I feel like cutting those things out are super important. And then also considering that in the professional workplace. And this is where it can get really difficult, because depending on the size of the organization that you are working in, it is probably inevitable, if you're working at a larger organization, that you might have some negative coworkers. And I've talked to people who are like, yeah, every day I come in and by 12 o'clock, Jean over there in her cubicle is just going on and on about this customer and everything that they're doing, yada, yada, yada. At that point, it's am I on the correct career path? Am I in an organization that can support that? And what do I do about it if that is the case? If you answered yes to those two things, then you need to consider other ways of trying to cut that negativity out. So maybe it's asking, hey, like, I really need to be in a different place within our building. I feel like I'm becoming negative. And if you explain that and you're in an organization that cares about your growth and your success, they're going to try and accommodate you or trying to find ways that you can work around it, because they want positive people working for them.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And an example I could give, I was, prior to working with Futurety, I was working with an organization where I came in super optimistic and excited. Within 5 months, I was just as negative as those around me. And it was just talking about clients like, oh, this person did this. Can you believe that? Or, oh my goodness, I can't believe they made this business decision. And it was just a very sour, poisonous, toxic place. I love the people I work with and I enjoyed working there, but I knew for my professional development to move forward, I had to make a change immediately, because I saw my work ethic suffering because of it. And that's a really, really scary thing to see in yourself, especially if you're a driven person and you see yourself not feeling driven. That is a sign that you have to get out and find some other opportunity that's going to be a better environment to support your goals.
Andrew, I'd like to ask a question. As somebody that is firmly in the boomer generation, do you think there's a difference in what I would see as a negative thing and what you would see as a negative thing?
I think so. And I think it comes back to, and it also ties back to the first question you asked about me around optimism and how millennials are making decisions. I think we are more and more emotionally driven than any other generation to date. And we allow those emotions to play a huge factor into our decision making and how we view the world, whether that be in a negative or a positive light. And the problem is I think we are an unbelievably empathetic generation that wants everybody to be equal. We want people to be enjoying their life. We want people to be happy, but it's connecting that empathy and then utilizing it to make emotionally intelligent decisions, which is exactly, what you guys are working towards. I think that's where the disconnect is. And what can happen is it can lead for someone to make an irrational decision based on good foundations. They just handled it in the wrong way. So I think that when we're seeing things negatively, we're looking at a lot of different angles, and it's much more of a tertiary color. It's not just black and white. It's shades of black, it's shades of gray, it's shades of black, it's shades of white. And I think that that's where the big difference is that it can be seen as super negative from somebody like my parents or my grandparents, where it was, your situation is not that bad. Why are you acting like this? And it's because, well, it makes me feel really bad. It might not look bad, but I feel terrible. And I think that's where the big difference is listening to emotion versus stifling it until it's unbearable.
So when somebody in my generation tells someone in your generation to suck it up, that's probably not going to help.
No. I don't think so. And I've heard it before from many people from my hometown.
Well, hey, you know what's interesting about that too, Andrew, as a Gen Xer, so I'm kind of in the middle between you two. One of the things that, when Jeff used that term, just, hey, suck it up, and some of that is colored by what certain generations go through, and I'm talking on a larger scale, whether it's a war, whether it's an event like 9/11, fill in the blanks. I think each generation has those.
I was old enough to be aware of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we didn't know if we'd be alive the next day.
Yeah, and I think some of that shapes that. Now, the beautiful part about EQ, as we know, right, is that it is learnable and learnable and learnable. So it wouldn't be okay for a millennial or a Gen Xer or a baby boomer to say, well, this is just how I am. This is just how our generation is, because that's quite frankly a cop-out, right? So you mentioned there about decisions, right, as it relates to what somebody does when they're faced with struggling with negativity. And that's a real key part of emotional intelligence, right? And again, Jeff, I know we've talked about it tons and tons of times. I think 6 Seconds, our preferred partner, has it simply as being smarter with feelings. I've kind of used the definition that it's managing my thoughts and my emotions so that I can make better decisions. And Andrew, from that perspective, do you think that if, again, we're talking specifically like the millennial generation, but do you think that if they were able to embrace that sort of idea, that concept, that approach, that discipline, that it could move them further along in their pursuits and what they're after?
Yeah, I mean, I think 120%, because, I think that with maturity and moving forward in your life comes that perspective that is so important to, in my opinion, that's kind of like the bridge between somebody who's empathetic but reacts emotionally too often and someone who is able to evaluate their emotions and use it to drive a better decision and harness that power. And I think perspective sits right in the middle. So I think that if more of my generation would have the gratitude and perspective to understand that other generations, because we've dealt with crises before. But for me, like 9/11, you mentioned 9/11. I was I believe I was in kindergarten when this happened. And I remember the TV being on, and just a terribly old TV that was a little box. So I was sitting like right in front of it. But I was not old enough to process until later on to understand, like, we are going to war because of this. So I think that not having that perspective of what a truly terrible time can be like and what it feels like is one of the reasons that maybe many people in the millennial generation aren't as grateful for what they have, or they don't have that perspective to understand that times are good. And I think that's really the limiting factor. And I think where a lot of the frustration comes from with the other generation.
So can you think of any ways, just right maybe off the top of your head, of how you've used emotional intelligence or EQ to help you make more optimal decisions? And let's go personal and real, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. Okay. How about that?
Yeah, I've got some really great examples. And one of them was last night, but I'll save that. So professionally, I think that one of the reasons that I love being in client services, so anybody that's in client services, you're literally like, the product is the project that your team works on and provides, or a service that you're providing to another business. And so when you're dealing with the account management and the project kickoff, like I'm doing on the new business side of things, there are many, many times that communication errors or something going wrong that you didn't anticipate can cause frustration. And, that your livelihood is to make sure that those projects work and that they're done well. So I use emotional intelligence every single day when it comes to that. I mean, with a recent project kickoff, it was there's a lot of misunderstanding between the level of there's been misunderstandings between the level of knowledge on one side that we might not have as far as the industry goes, or on the other side as not understanding necessarily what it is exactly that we do. And it's really easy to get frustrated in those situations. So being able to take those emotions and then kind of build a bridge between where you're standing and where somebody else is standing, like you can't find middle ground in a river. You have to build a bridge over it. And I feel like emotional intelligence allows you to do that professionally. And I used it on a call the other day when there was a contract dispute, and within the contract, it was written, but I did not do a good job of explaining it in a way that made sense. So the result of that was frustration from the client in saying, well, you didn't say this. But then once we went back through the contract and worked around it, I apologized immediately, saying, I should have been better at communicating because this is a very important piece of the contract for you. It involves money. And then he afterwards was like, that's also my fault. I didn't ask the right questions, and I didn't read through the contract well enough to see that this was in here.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, people are willing to work with you if you approach them in a way that does not attack them or does not put their defenses up. And it sounds super simple. My mom always talks about, if you corner a dog that's cute, eventually their true nature of trying to protect themselves is going to come out, and they'll bite you if you, approach them quickly in a corner. And the same thing goes for humans. We're always subconsciously looking out for for our livelihood and for our best interest.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't find ways to use that emotional intelligence and empathy to understand their situation, it is going to impact you in a very, very negative way. And you're going to find yourself with a lot of issues because of it.
So how about the personal one? And this was last night. Do we have any video for this?
No, I have a recording of the conversation. I probably can't use it. So recently we've been dealing with some different things. We're going to be moving out from the townhouse that I live in. And some different things happened that were kind of out of my control when I moved in that put us in jeopardy, put us in direct violation of our lease. So in turn, our landlord was saying, look, we can hold your security deposits. And for me, I just moved in 5 months ago, and I was like, I do not want to lose my full security deposit, only living there for 5 months in a situation where I did nothing wrong. So I basically turned to to this exact strategy of understanding the landlord's point of view, admitting where we were wrong, and then proposing a solution. And so we had a phone call with her last night, and I basically told her, I was like, look, I am really, really sorry that this has caused you excess stress and work. I know you don't want to deal with that. I related to her and explaining that, look, my parents took over my grandma's properties when she passed away. I understand that this is terrible. My former spouse, she managed a whole property, just like you are doing. And this was wrong. We wronged you. But I promise you, we want to make it right. How can we do that? And by the end of the call, she was like, so are you the negotiator that lives here in this apartment? And I was like, well, not necessarily. But, I just felt like you just have to relate to them and admit when you're wrong, because it's so hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And the hardest part is, especially when you're feeling like emotionally attacked or misunderstood, in trying to relate as to why somebody would think that way.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, by the end of the call, she was like, give us your address. We're going to be sending your security deposits to those addresses, and you guys will get a full reimbursement. So,
well, great. Those are great examples, Andrew. Great examples. So what do you think is one problem that emotional intelligence can help as it relates to career planning, and specifically around, again, exercising optimism as a competency within our model, just as a leverage point. But what are some things that you think, or maybe one thing you think, a problem you think that EQ could help as it relates to that?
I think it plays a big part in when dealing with superiors that you might be not seeing eye to eye with. I think it's really, really easy when you are not at a level where you have to deal with the, it sounds like a bad term, but I don't mean it this way, but the bureaucracy that might be happening above you, or the pressures that might be being put on somebody who is then in turn managing you. So I think if we're relating this back to the millennial generation, we do not take criticism very well, I don't think, personally. I think that it's really easy for us to get on the defensive, and that's why some people might say, like you said, Jeff, suck it up. If we feel attacked, it's really hard for us to look into using that emotional intelligence to channel outside of yourself and try and look above the trees and see what's happening down below. That's something that my mom always taught us when we were younger, is every time you're faced with a situation or a problem, climb to the top of the tree, look into the distance, and try and understand what's happening that you aren't seeing right now. And I think that when a manager, or maybe you are a manager and a director, comes to you and says, look, this is a problem, we're not happy with it, you need to fix it, it would be really, really easy to just take all that in, get upset, and then dole it out on the other people on your team or that you're managing, or to harbor bad resentment against somebody else and let that sour the relationship moving forward, instead of digging deeper into what it is that's happening by just simply asking and trying to have an intelligent conversation, or by looking at what's happening and just even considering. It doesn't even have to be an interaction. You just have to think, okay, so we missed our numbers because of this, and this person is directly accountable to this giant number. I'm sure that they're dealing with a lot of other things, as well as potentially other business units taking credit for something that they may have done, or saying that they're at fault for something that's happening. So just because somebody else doesn't potentially use emotional intelligence in an interaction, if you're able to harness that power that you possess, it makes your world a lot easier, because misunderstandings are kind of at the root, in my opinion, of all relationships that turn bad at the start.
You know, that's interesting, Andrew, because you just added in something I think is real important, and that is empathy. And I know, Jeff, again, something we've talked a lot about.
It's one of the most important things I think we've talked about.
Yeah, because the idea of understanding what that manager is dealing with that director, or fill in the blank with any other example. Another thing that I thought about too, Andrew, I don't know what your thoughts are, but when I think about, exercising optimism, and then, also those that maybe are prone or kind of in a rut of negativity, I've used this example before that we, all human beings, we're painters, we're artists. And each day we're given a blank canvas, and we've got all the tools necessary to paint whatever the portrait or the scene might be. And every day those paintings are being put into a museum, and they're on the walls, and they're walls that they have our names on it, right? Mm-hmm. And anybody that you work with, your family included in the personal life, they see that. They get to know, are the paintings that I make beautiful to look at? Are they positive? Are they inspiring? Or are they gloomy? Are they dark? Are they kind of depressing? Or, fill in the blank with whatever would be the negative. Now take that example and imagine if you're in that negative place and you want to get some coaching or mentoring from someone else inside of your workplace. And keep in mind, that person has seen your museum. They've seen it every day. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm the kind of guy, because of my empathy levels, I'd want to give them a shot. I wouldn't want to prejudge, but I could not help but think in the back of my head, this person has painted so many negative portraits. I'm not so sure this is going to be good, or it's going to be right. So that's just something as an aside I thought of as you were talking about that. Kind of moving on here, who is inspiring you right now, whether it's recent history, and why? It's not a trick question either, Andrew.
It's, I could be, I definitely have to say that when you and I first interacted, I kind of had not thought of emotional intelligence until, even before before everything that you're doing now, you were probably one of the most optimistic and positive people who is implementing this every single day in your life. And
Andrew, I need to interrupt you. Brett, who does he send the check to again?
Me. Sends it to me. I have to listen to this.
See, Jeff is over here now, just like rolling his eyes right now, Andrew.
I know. I have to.
Thank you. That was the proper response. Thank you for saying that, Andrew. But continue.
So I think that you were somebody that really put this on my radar initially, and it couldn't have been more opportune. I mean, just absolutely divine timing, because by the time after our first conversation, within a month, I had just lost my job at a place that I thought was like my ticket to the top. So when that happened, I found myself like that was the most negative following 2 to 3 months of my life. And I had never really experienced being like kicked in the teeth like that, to say. So it was really interesting to see how difficult it is. Because like I can truly say that I understand that it is hard to use emotional intelligence when things aren't going well. It is probably one of the most difficult things to do, because everything in our head, I mean, there's even a chemical that is released when something bad happens to you that literally makes you nonstop think about it. And it's like, how do you get past this almost naturistic instinct to be negative and to get upset? So that was a huge piece in my life that really inspired me to try and get past that and to make better decisions and to use that to basically be a springboard for my story, which is, it now kind of has.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think on a larger scale, I'm incredibly inspired by the professional community that I'm connected with, both in person here in Columbus as well as on LinkedIn. And I've been very, very intentional about who I'm connecting with and who I'm following on there, because, the professional part of me is such a huge piece of my life that any negative or toxic person can spoil that entire positive pool, in my opinion. Because if I see a negative post in the middle of the day, it ruins anything else, any other content that I'm trying to consume and learn from.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody so unanimously has been using LinkedIn in the way that they envisioned it to network, to connect with people, to find jobs. I follow a couple different HR leaders on LinkedIn that are probably the most helpful, positive people. I mean, these people have millions of people following them, hundreds of thousands of likes on their posts, and they're using it to help professionals who are in a bad position, who have had some bad luck, to get new jobs and get the careers they ever wanted. And it's unbelievable to see people like that, and surprise, they're HR professionals, so they know all about emotional intelligence.
Right.
But I think so that's another piece that's been hugely, hugely inspiring to me. And one other person who recently came into my life through Futurety, it was a mutual connection. His name is Ethan Dewhurst, and he's the founder and CEO of a media company that was out of Springfield that's moved to Columbus. And they make some of the best professional videos that I've ever seen, like stuff that gives you chills when you watch it. And I have never met a more he is so positive that he'll be at an event and he will just see somebody who he doesn't know. He will walk right up to him, smile, shake their hand, and just like almost yell, "What's up? What's going on?" And he just brings this energy that you can immediately see that person who is standing alone and feeling awkward just completely reciprocates it. And he builds relationships like that just through that positivity and that just glow that he has about it. And I mean, he's been working at like 18-hour days for the past month because they have so many projects going and he's so invested in what they're doing. And he called me the other day and he was the same exact person. He wasn't changed at all. He's like, we're getting through it. I mean, just so optimistic about most people. If they don't have sleep, there's not a whole lot of optimism that you're going to pull out of them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like it refuses to let any of that negativity come out of him. And I've literally never seen him be negative. And it's been incredible to see because he's 1 year older than I am.
Wow.
And for somebody that close to me in age doing something so huge, and it's just great to work with him. And I've totally become a better person and a better professional and having the opportunity to collaborate with them.
Wow, that's awesome. So I usually do this at the beginning, but I'm going to do it at the end for this show. So Andrew, tell us, what is it that you do professionally and about your company, Futurety?
So I am the business development manager here at Futurety. So I manage and oversee all of our new growth activities, whether that be like inbound content creation or straight sales and finding new opportunities, networking, getting out to events, that sort of thing, meeting new people, as well as managing channel partnerships like the ones that I just mentioned to you with Champion City Media. And Futurety, in a nutshell, we're a data analytics and communications agency focused on influencing positive behavior change by helping organizations connect their consumers or their constituents or patients on a human level. So it sounds kind of converse, but you can see in our work and what we've done that through the numbers, you can actually achieve a level of humanity and understanding that has never been done before. And we use this for impact projects. So we work in the smart mobility space in finding ways to connect and communicate with underserved and transportation disadvantaged neighborhoods and demographics in ways where we're trying to help with solving homelessness by understanding who's at risk, and even in healthcare where we're finding ways to understand who needs this life-saving service and how are they going to respond in a positive way to become more compliant? And how do we get them to interact in a way that's going to make them healthier, even though they may not trust it, or they may be scared, or they might not know what to do. And it's almost like using that kind of emotional intelligence within the communication strategies by understanding who people are at the core at scale.
That's awesome. Andrew, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. This has been a great show. Your insights are very, very positive, and I think it'll go a long way for our listeners to hear your viewpoints. So we really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. It was an absolute pleasure, and it was so much fun talking to you guys about this.
All right, take care.
Thanks for subscribing and listening to the Spirit of EQ podcast with Jeff East and Eric Pennington. Spirit of EQ is a preferred partner of 6 Seconds, the Emotional Intelligence Network. 6 Seconds is a nonprofit organization researching what works in emotional intelligence. Best practices are shared through methods and tools that are global, scientific, and transformational. To find out more about Spirit of EQ or to request a speaker, go to spiritofeq.com. Our contact information is in the podcast show notes as well. And now for our special offer.
Hi, this is Jeff again. I just want to let everybody know that if you have any questions or want more information about anything we've talked about, just send me a quick email. And my email is jeff@spiritofeq.com, and I'll get right back with you. Thanks.